Oh, all right. Thanks, Tammy.
I'll call this gathering to order. Because we don't have a quorum test. I'm Bruce Thomas.
Nancy.
That's Michael's. Very marriage.
All right. Tracy.
Tracy Whitehead, Manchester Transit.
And then here am I, Sylvia Von Aulock with the commission. And right behind me,
Adam Lasney with the commission.
go ahead, Nate.
Nate Miller with the commission.
And just walking in,
Linda Kunot, Francis.
hi, Linda. And why don't we have everyone say hello? I'll go ahead and go through it. George Sioris, Derry.
Good morning, George from Derry, Sierras.
Hi, George. We have Mark.
Good morning, Mark Sunan from the town of New Boston.
Thank you. We have Mike.
Morning, Mike Witten, Manchester Transit.
We're not hearing sound other than through that computer.
Oh, hold on. Is this, that is on?
Yeah,
Why?
it's going through your computer.
We have sound issues, so 1 second. What should be the speakers? Not the mic.
Look at this now.
Let's see, who's next on the, Mike, will you say hello again?
Hello again, my friends.
Ah, there we go. Now we have it. Okay, let's see. We have Linda.
Good morning, Linda Westcott, DOT.
Thank you, Linda. Lee,
Hey, good morning, everybody. Lee Levine, Federal Highway Administration.
great, thanks, Lee. Carl,
Good morning, everyone. Carl Epic with Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Ben,
Good morning, Ben with SNHPC.
Zach,
Good morning, Zach Swick with the commission.
and Tammy.
Morning, Tammy Zamoyski with the commission.
All right, great. That's introductions. Take them away, Bruce.
Okay, so we're gonna skip the review of the notes from August 18 until we have a quorum, and incidentally, the notes from June 16th have not been approved either, so we'll skip both of those. So the first item is 3.1 mobility management by Benjamin Herbert, mobility manager of Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
So Ben, you want to, there you go.
Yep, let me just
And-
get this set up.
Tammy, did you give Ben ability to?
You have to do that as the host.
Here we go. Okay, Ben, you can bring up your presentation.
All right, how does this look?
We've got that on, yeah, it looks perfect now.
Awesome, sweet. Okay, morning, everybody. My name is Benjamin Herbert. I'm the Region 8 Mobility Manager here at SNHPC, and I'm going to give a presentation going over what mobility management is. So I want to start off this presentation by talking about a vision that New Hampshire has, which is an integrated system of safe, reliable, and sustainable transportation options that allow residents to maintain independence and participate in work and community life, no matter their age or ability. So in order to materialize this vision, New Hampshire has set a mission to improve the coordination, capacity, accessibility, quality, and sustainability of mobility services statewide. And so this brings us to the principles of mobility management. These guiding principles were developed by the National Cooperative Research Program It is the intent of the State Coordinating Council that these principles form the guiding philosophy of the Mobility Management Network. So these 5 principles are: number 1, prioritize customer needs and the meeting of these needs through a coordinated use of providers. Number 2, an evolving concept that aims to improve specialized transportation, particularly for veterans, older adults, disabled, low income, and any other disadvantaged populations. Number 3, it looks beyond a single transportation service or solution to a family of services philosophy that can offer a wide range of services and options to meet an equally wide array of community demographics and needs. Number 4, mobility management begins with community vision in which the entire transportation network including public transit, private operators, cycling, walking, and volunteer drivers work together with customers, planners, and stakeholders to deliver coordinated transportation options that best meets a community's needs. And number 5, mobility management requires a customized approach, meaning no 2 programs are exactly alike, even though they share a common core philosophy, desired outcomes, and require partnerships across the spectrum. So this is a flow chart of the New Hampshire Mobility Management Network. The network is intended to be a collaborative partnership between the State Coordinating Council, the Regional Coordinating Councils, New Hampshire Department of Transportation, other state agencies, commissions, and mobility managers. DOT will hold the contract for the statewide mobility manager, and the RCCs, through a lead agency, will hold the contract for the regional mobility managers. So first, we have the State Coordinating Council. These are the 4 main duties of the State Coordinating Council. They'll develop, implement, and provide guidance for the coordination of community transportation options within New Hampshire. They set statewide coordination policies for community transportation, establish community transportation regions, encourage the development of regional coordinating councils, assist other regional efforts as needed, and monitor the results of statewide coordination. They approve the formation of regional coordination councils and the selection of regional transportation coordinators, and they solicit and accept donations for funding to implement and sustain community transportation. Next, we have the regional coordinating councils. Throughout the state are these RCCs representing regions defined and approved by the SCC. Members of an RCC are immune from liability in executing duties of the council. The 3 duties of the RCC are to facilitate the implementation of coordinated community transportation in the region, encourage the development of improved and expanded regional community transportation services, and advise the SCC on the status of community transportation in the region. And on the right is a map of all of the RCCs within the state. And I will, now we'll go over our region, which is Region 8, the Greater Manchester Dairy Salem region. Most of this region is the same as the SNHPC region. The only municipality within SNHPC that is not a part of this region is Francistown. And we also have a bunch of municipalities that are outside of SNHPC included in this region as well. And this includes Salem, Atkinson, Hampstead, Sandown, Danville, and Plastow. In accordance with statutory duties, the SCC will take the lead in developing, implementing, and maintaining the New Hampshire Mobility Management Network. This comes with input from the RCCs and the advice and consent of DOT. This will include, but is not limited to, the development of roles, responsibilities, and qualifications for the mobility manager positions, the development of performance indicators, statewide strategic plans, and ongoing evaluation and improvement of the network. To guide its work, the SCC will develop and implement a comprehensive strategic plan to improve its coordination function and ensure progress on statewide transportation goals, including the mobility management network. The RCCs will take the information provided by SCC and customize it to fit their unique regional needs and circumstances. They will also develop and execute regional strategic plans or work plans inclusive of statewide goals to the network. Lead agency is responsible for hiring a regional mobility manager. The lead agency will be responsible for the standard employee supervision and maintenance. However, the RCC will be responsible for assigning tasks, guiding mobility manager, developing work plans and projects with additional input from the SCC, DOT, and statewide mobility manager. The RCC will assist the lead agency with performance evaluation of the mobility manager. If there is an issue with the mobility manager that cannot be resolved or is not appropriate to discuss at the RCC level, the RCC chair should notify the mobility manager's direct supervisor for appropriate restitution. In turn, mobility manager should bring any issues to the chair of the RCC of his or her direct supervisor. Finally, we have the roles of mobility managers themselves. These roles can be broken out into 4 categories. There's regional service delivery, regional coordination, capacity building, and statewide planning, coordination, and capacity building. Or to summarize these: customers, providers, the system, and connecting the region. So first we have regional service delivery. And in this, we'd be assisting the RCC and local providers in developing a customer-centered approach to transportation access and coordination in the region for disadvantaged populations. We'd be developing relationships with transit-dependent and vulnerable populations in the region to address issues of access, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensure their voices are heard. We'll also create and update an inventory of available transportation services in the region to be used in marketing these services to the public and other non-transportation providers. And we'll conduct outreach activities in the region to educate and train people on how to access and use the transportation network/services. Next up is regional coordination. Here we'll cultivate multi-agency partnerships, which may reduce costs through increased efficiency and effective transportation coordination, and we'll develop new opportunities for coordination and expansion of transportation options across municipal and regional boundaries. Next up is capacity building. Here I'll assist the RCC with developing its organizational infrastructure and capacity to effectively fulfill its mission. Efforts will include strategic planning, fundraising, communication, and member recruitment and retention. I'll also identify and research corporate, foundation, and government sources of funding for matching funds. This will include opportunities to use braided funding streams. Periodic needs assessments will be conducted to identify barriers to mobility in the region and propose recommendations to reduce those barriers. I'll evaluate regional systems and technology used to efficiently deliver mobility services. Consideration should be given to access and ease of use for customers, ability to integrate in other regional state systems, and modes of transportation, allowing a customer to effectively plan trips from start to finish. This will also include development of or updates to a technology plan. I'll also build relationships with the state, regional, and local elected officials and community leaders to educate them about the needs, roles, and benefits of regional and local transportation services and coordination. These stakeholder relationships may develop into support financially and operationally for local and regional transportation services and coordination efforts. Finally, we have statewide planning, coordination, and capacity building. Here I'll participate and then coordinate with the SCC, local RCC, and statewide mobility management network, which includes the statewide mobility manager and regional mobility managers. I'll also participate in state, regional, and local transportation planning activities, including required human services coordinated plans, the SCC strategic plan, the RCC strategic plan or work plan, and RPC planning and other related plans or initiatives. And I'll assist DOT, the SCC, and statewide mobility managers to implement strategic initiatives identified in the SCC strategic plan and other statewide planning documents. And that's everything. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Any questions for Ben? You can stop sharing now, Ben.
Thank you.
Sylvia, we have one question online in the chat.
Yeah,
Mark would like to know who is the current chair of the RCC for Region 8.
That would be Fred Verberge, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep, that's Fred Roberge.
Yep, from Easter Seals.
Easter Seals. Linda, you had a question.
So what region is Francistown in?
That would be Region 5.
And did I mishear? Are there, I kind of missed that piece of your talk. So did I understand, tell me if I'm incorrect, Francistown is not in Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission regular region.
Just
I
for
get it, I know, but were there also other towns not in Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission that are now in Region 8?
Yeah, and I got that right here. And that would be Salem, Atkinson, Hampstead, Sandown, Danville, and Plastow.
And do you know the reason why?
Well, originally, those regions were part of the Derry Salem region, which was its own separate region. And Sylvia can jump in if she wants to, but back in 2019/2020, that region actually merged with Region 8 to form its own region.
I don't know why, I don't know who has drawn the boundaries over the years.
That's what
I don't know, Nate, do you have?
Boundaries were drawn originally probably around 2005 or 2006. And at that time, Francistown was in a different region of the state.
But these regions, it's because I never encountered this map before, so my brain is not wrapping around it. This map is for what?
It's for, well, Ben can explain it, but it's for regional transportation coordination. So this is, there are many different transportation providers that serve the communities in each of these regions. So
This is a state map or a federally required map?
it is a state map to meet a federal requirement.
Okay.
But you do bring up an interesting point in that, you know, Francistown had been in a different commission's region
Right.
when this was all drawn up. I wonder if that's something we should bring up at the SCC meeting, in that now Francistown is with SNHPC, why not reconsider that, the boundary?
I wasn't even thinking about that so much, is that it's just another, to me, it's another and I didn't realize it was that old, so I'm done, I don't need to hold up the meeting. You've got time, the reason it makes me insane is because it's another complicating lever, like the more levels of bureaucracy they waste on us, the harder it is to know who's doing what and who's in charge and who's responsible. When things don't go right, it's infuriating from the outside, from one not in the group working on the little things. It's very frustrating to see the ballooning of inability to follow the pathway of what results in things that impact our daily lives. It's
Well,
not a complaint, it's merely an observation. Thank you for taking.
right, I think actually the mobility management group is trying to simplify all that so that you have just one person to chat with. And for Region 8, it's now Ben. And for Region 5, who is it for Region 5, Ben?
That would be Terry Johnson from Southwest Regional Planning Commission.
Yeah, that's because Francistown
Right.
used to be with Southwest.
If we're never with anybody else.
Yeah, so it's,
That's okay.
Terry will make things easy.
Mhm.
If you have any questions
I
there.
mean, part of the idea here, Linda, is actually to try to streamline things, because part of what mobility managers are doing around the state is looking at the existing transit services in those different communities and making sure that they're not overlapping or providing redundant service, and that, you know, the limited transit funds that exist are, you know, being deployed as effectively as possible, filling gaps and reducing overlaps. So you wouldn't want Manchester Transit Authority providing similar service on similar days to similar populations than Easter Seals would provide or Meals on Wheels would provide. So part of this effort is to create some efficiencies, realize some efficiencies and hopefully deploy more service for the same amount of funding over time.
So I guess I'm all in favor of that part of it. It's the whole hierarchy part of it that I'm a little concerned about where they're all, it's all about policy making. So I would prefer to have policy making be done in a more discussions or, you know, like it's that whole push towards not having individuals driving around and create larger mandated public transportation systems. I know that's the big push in the Green New Deal thing, and my concern, he can't do anything about it. I'm just bringing it up because we're having to be talking about it. I would like going forward if the mobility manager would communicate to Southern New Hampshire Planning Ship leadership any policy discussions you become aware of early in the talks rather than the day before we have to vote on it.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
not aware of any policy, but I also think,
I anticipate they will come. I guarantee you they're not coming immediately, but I foresee that being the way it's likely to go.
one of the significant focus areas has been on public, really community transportation for people that don't have other options. They can't drive.
I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of what Ben has been working on, meeting with Meals on Wheels, meeting with Easter Seals, trying to figure out, because we have large areas of the region that don't
Have anything.
have anything. Yeah, and so trying to fill those gaps and make sure that the people that are the most vulnerable and don't have other options have some way of getting to medical appointments, have some way of getting to essential services.
I think Francistown would be pleased if that's what the focus actually was and not worrying about how to make everybody have to take public transportation. You know, if the focus is what they really say the focus is, sounds excellent.
Yeah.
My concern is that
yeah, I don't think in public, making everyone use public transit doesn't make sense.
of course it doesn't make sense.
So I don't think that's the push, but right now, like Francistown is. You're served by CVTC, which is Community Volunteer Transportation Company, that's Ellen's group, and you're in better shape than, let's say, where has nothing, no volunteer driver program, they aren't serviced by anyone, like Deerfield and Candia, those communities. So right now, and the rest of the CVTC communities are probably within the Southwest region. So it does make sense that way. Anyway. All right.
Any other
thanks, Ben.
questions? Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. Zach Swick, Senior GIS Analyst, is going to do an equity analysis report, sections 1 and 2.
All right, Zach, I've just made you co-host.
Okay, let's see if I can share here. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay. And now I'm in presentation mode.
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, good morning, everyone. First things first, you're gonna have to excuse me. I'm coming off the tail end of COVID here. So I'm not gonna be quite as chipper and effervescent as I usually am. So bear with me on that. The other thing is, since I'm not in person there, if people have questions and comments, which will come up through all this, I'd be able to see it and we could have a more interactive conversation. But since it can't happen, if you have a question or something, just please feel free to jump in, because there's a lot here and we have plenty of time. So if we want to talk about stuff, we can, and I want to make sure we get to everything. Okay, so first things first is a question of what do we mean when we say equity? What do we mean when we talk about equity in transportation? So I'm giving doing a report on the equity analysis report that we did. This is a report that came out of our work, that what we call our Title VI work. And you'll hear that, if you've been around here, you'll hear that term fairly often, Title VI. And we use it to refer to a couple of different things. And really, it's not. It's one specific thing, and there's a couple of different features. And there are several different features. One would be Title VI You also hear environmental justice, and you'll also hear non-discrimination. These are all different, non-discrimination equality programs that fall under slightly different legal statutes, and but we kind of use them all together. And if you actually look at our Title VI program, it says, our Title VI plan, it says Title VI environmental justice and non-discrimination. Equity, when we talk about equity in transportation, it's kind of a term, an umbrella term to catch all of those. And for the first few slides here, they're pretty text heavy, which I don't like to do, but the text kind of actually matters for a lot of these because they are legal. So I'm going to go ahead and go through them. So although environmental justice, EJ, Title VI, and non-discrimination and equity are distinct elements, they're often used interchangeably in common terms, but they're not exactly the same. Equity in transportation seeks fairness in mobility and access to meet the needs of all community members. And a central goal of transportation equity is to facilitate social and economic opportunities for providing equitable levels of access to affordable and reliable transportation options based on the needs of a population being served, particularly populations that are traditionally underserved. It's important to note that transportation equity does not mean equal. I'll come back to that in a sec. An equitable transportation plan considers the circumstances impacting the community's mobility and connectivity needs. And this information is used to determine the measures needed to develop an equitable transportation network. So what do we mean there when we say equity does not mean equal? So if I'm going to go pick up my brother at the airport and his my nieces, so he has two daughters, 7 and 3, and I show up at the airport, pick them up, and I have my car and I don't have any car seats, I've technically provided an equitable and equal transportation opportunity for all of them. They all have a seat that they can sit in. It's all, I'm all providing them the same thing. But I don't think any of us would say that it was an equitable, considering that it's not safe for a 3-year-old, or a 7-year-old to ride in a normal seat in a car designed for an adult. So that's what we talk about when, equal does not mean equitable. So the most specific and the most, the most set aspect of any of our equity work is the Title VI Act of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this specifies that no person in the United States on the grounds of race, color, or national origin be excluded from participation in, be denied in benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal assistance. So if you receive any federal money, you cannot discriminate based on race, color, or national origin. And this comes down to us through FTA and federal highways. And this means that they have a legal requirement to monitor that, us for themselves for compliance and us. And Title VI it requires that we analyze whether design or future changes in service or delivery of transportation will have a disparate aspect on those populations. And if there are disparate impacts found, that they're unavoidable, or identifying ways that they can mitigate them. There's another aspect. It's the EJ part of our Title VI and the EJ plan. And these are 2 executive orders, one from 1994 and one from 2000, which expand FTAs and federal highways responsibilities beyond just race, national origin. And so the first one on the left, it expands it to people low income, typically understood as those living below the poverty threshold. And then the one on the right there expands it to those with limited English proficiency. So people traditionally people 5 years or older who speak English less than very well. And that's, it's kind of its own separate thing, but we've also been given federal guidance that, this can also be construed as part of Title VI, because if you're from another country, you don't speak English very well, and you get discriminated against, therefore that would be discrimination based on national origin, and therefore that would be against Title VI in general. So it's kind of its own separate thing, but it's also separate. these are the different components. I just include this for people if they want to go back and learn more about this in their own times. It gives you each different particular class, and then the population it covers, the programs underneath it, and guidance for it in general. So we're going to be doing, so we have done an equity, well, first half of an equity analysis. This came out of our Title VI plan, and it follows a particular, fairly closely, a guide provided by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. That's the link down on the bottom right, where they have a number of different steps for going through and doing an equity analysis for NPOs in particular, but it could also be state DOTs. And the first two of these are identify populations for analysis. Number two are identify needs and concerns. There are a couple different there are different sections after that. But NPOs must assess the potential for disparate impacts, and DHAE, I'll describe that in a sec, on underserved persons that may result from any activities involving federal funds. And so what is a disparate impact? A disparate impact is a facially neutral or policy or practice that disproportionately affects any member of a group or identity based on race, color, or national origin, where the receipts policy or practice lacks a substantial legitimate justification, and where there exists one or more alternatives that would serve the same legitimate objectives, but with less discriminate effect on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And then there's, as I talked about the DHAE before, there's disproportionately high and adverse effects, is predominantly borne by a minority or low income population, and will be suffered by minority population and or low income population, and is appreciably more severe or greater in magnitude than the adverse effects that will be suffered by the non-minority population and or non-low income population. So as part of this, the first section of an equity analysis is identifying the populations that you want to look at, both in terms of, who are we interested in and where do they live? And so following that, we came up with, the hierarchy, or not hierarchy, a list of populations that we were interested in. The first three are the Title VI EJ populations that I've already listed, which are, racial, Hispanic and minority, low income, or LEP. And those are, we are federally required to, include analyses for those. But we also want to look at populations that are not necessarily those specifically required. So we also looked at 65 plus. We looked at those with a disability, and we also looked at no vehicle households, because these are three populations that traditionally have been underserved in our modern transportation system. Another one that we could have looked at and we didn't, I might think about it maybe next time, would be those under the age of 16 or under the age of 5, those people who can't drive, too young to drive, essentially. So the first thing is to figure out where those populations are. So if we look at race and ethnic minority, this is so we're just a regular map of our region. You'll know that Francistown has a kind of a dashed line to its above it and to its to the left. And that's because Francistown shares a census tract with the neighboring towns of Bennington and Deering. It's the only tract it's the only town in our region that shares a census tract with another municipality. So we have to include those as well, but it doesn't really change much of the overall results for the whole region, just because it's Deering and Bennington are relatively small communities. And the unit of measurement here is census tracts as opposed to towns in general, just so we could see differences within individual towns, individual neighborhoods, that sort of thing. So for racial and ethnic minority, you can see there's concentration around Manchester, but also in some of the neighboring, some of the suburbs, like parts of Bedford and Hooksett and Derry. If we look at those living below the poverty threshold, again, concentration around city center Manchester, but also populations again in Goffstown and Derry. Limited English proficiency. This time it's anything beyond fairly low back level is going to be found in Manchester. That's not to say there aren't populations elsewhere. It's just, the highest concentration by far is going to be in Manchester itself. We look at 65 years and older, we have a fairly different spread of population. We have, there is a much larger, many more communities have a larger percentage that are 65 years or older than some of these other groups. And so you can kind of see that, green, which is kind of a medium low, is kind of found just about everywhere except, New Boston is the only town that doesn't have any. And then there's that one spot there, so you can see there in Goffstown that's bright red. And if anybody knows that, that's because that's the Hillsborough County nursing home, the location of that. And so where you have, in general, they probably have a population that's about 11% senior anyway, and then you drop a facility with 300 plus beds, that can skew something pretty heavily. So just if anybody's wondering about that. Living with a disability, again, there is, some pockets there in Manchester, but there is kind of all over, from Candia to, Western Londonderry, there are, higher levels of, or Derry, there are higher levels of people with disability. And single or households without a vehicle, again, it's mostly concentrated around Manchester, again, with some populations in Derry and a little bit there and Bedford as well. So these are the different rates for our region. You can see the groups on the left. And then, just for comparison, I have the US rate and then New England rate, followed by the regional rate, which is obviously our rate. So, minority rate is, about 15%. Poverty rate is about 8%. LEP rate for us is a little, 4.5%. Senior is about 14%. Disability is about 12%, and no vehicle is about 5%. Most of these are individual rates, except for vehicles, which is obviously households and not individuals. We don't, because that's the way it's captured. And we're generally we're not in line with a lot of the US and New England rate for, with the exception of we're pretty close with seniors and we're really close with disability. But with everything else, we can see that typically the US rate is higher than the New England rate, and the New England rate is higher than ours. So we want to isolate areas that are significantly different than the regional rate in general. And by that, we looked at the regional standard deviation for the tracks. And then we said, okay, we're going to say, if you're above the regional rate plus one standard deviation, then you're going to, be considered a hotspot for one of these communities. For example, if you're, have a rate of higher than 27.5% minority, you're going to be considered a hotspot for the minority because you're one regional deviation above your one standard deviation above the regional rate. And so if you then say which different tracks score based on that criteria, these are all the tracks that score on one or more. So you can see a lot of them are in Manchester, but we also have some there in Bedford. When they're in Londonderry, we have that track there that I pointed out earlier in Goffstown, which has the Hillsborough County nursing home. So these are different ones. And if we want to prioritize isolating not only individual communities but individual locations, one way to do that is to create an index, and that's to say, okay, everybody, if you score for a certain amount, we're going to add you up. And we'll prioritize certain areas. And so then you have to decide, well, how are we going to score different things? And we came up with the idea that, for our federally required classes, we're going to give you a score of 2, or 2 points assigned to you if you score, just based on the fact that it's a federally required class. And then if for our 3 other non-federally required protected classes, we decided to give you just 1 point. And the results for that look something like this. So these are all the tracks that scored, and we have everything that's above that, where it says census tracts above are within the equity area. Those above that line scored 4 or more. Everything below scored, anywhere between 3 and 1. So we came up with that using 4 or more was going to be our threshold for defining our equity area. And the resulting equity area looks like this. I don't know, can you guys see my mouse on the screen? I can't remember.
No,
No, okay. I was hoping I could point with it.
actually, yes,
so
I can.
Only when you move it.
only when I move it. Okay, so if you look at my mouse moving right here, this is it, right where the mouse is. That's where if you're at the commission, that's where the office is right today, right above. So halfway between where it says Kelly Street and McGregor Street is the office. So this is Manchester. Mostly a lot of the downtown, a lot of the central city, and then it kind of snakes out to the west side, goes all the way over to all the way up to Goffstown Road, up to the is it Mount Calvary Cemetery, and then it goes down along the river down to 293. So kind of that hill, you go up on Beach Street, and then you come down to exit 1. That's where it goes, and then it goes over to what is sometimes called the Hollows area of Manchester, which is there's a China Wind is the restaurant in the area that I think of. So that's the area in general. So it's Manchester, but it doesn't include the North End. It doesn't include a lot of the South Side. It doesn't include certain areas on the Southwest. And this is the results from that. So we have. These are the different, showing the different rates, comparing the equity area that I just showed and the rest of the region, and how they can differ fairly significantly. So the minority rate for the equity area is about 40%, which is less even still than the national rate, just FYI. The remainder of the region is about 11% for poverty. It's 20% for the equity area. It's 5% for the rest of the region. For LEP, it's 15% for the region, or for the area, equity area, it's 5%, 3% for the rest of the region, 10% for the equity area, 15% for the rest of the region. So as senior is the only one of our 6 classes that we looked at where the equity region has a lower percentage than the rest of the region, which is perhaps not surprising considering most of the equity area is mostly urban, and in general, the rural population tends to be a little bit older. I will say though that there's still there's still many more seniors per acre in the equity area than there are outside the equity area. There are still there's about, I want to say there are 4,000 people in the equity area that are about 65 years older, which would make them about the same population as Chester or something like that. For disability, it's a 17% for the equity area, 11% for the remainder of the region, and for no vehicle households, it's 13% for the equity area and 3% for the rest of the region. Are there any questions before I move on to part 2?
Keep going.
Keep going.
Very
Okay, not
interesting.
hearing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I just said this is very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, no, I'll try. So number 2 is then, okay, we've got the area, the populations we're looking at, and the specific area of analysis that we want to look at. But so we identify needs and concerns. These are needs and concerns that come up about transportation, but they might not necessarily be, rely on or be under the, this purvey of the MPO. So we're looking at general transportation metrics, or different questions about the transportation system that we may not have control over, but we at least want to be acknowledged and be conscious of. So first, we did this one of 2 ways. One, I mentioned we looked at some metrics, but 2, we did a survey. So we sent a short survey. It was 4 questions, so pretty short, out to 70 contacts that either represent organizations that serve the populations we were looking at, or they were community activists that worked within the region with those areas. And out of that, we got 36 responses, which is pretty good for a survey. And this included, governments. Well, our respondents included government, social service nonprofits, hospitals, business owners, and just individual advocacy groups and individual advocates. you know what I'm trying to say. The so we, there were 4 questions. 2 of them were open-ended, which means we said, just here's a question, give us your response, and then we have to go back later and classify them into groups. And so we can actually say something. And the other 2 are closed-ended, where we say, here are our 6 or 7 responses. Pick the ones that apply to you. And so the first one is closed-ended, and that was, which of these groups do you primarily work with? And you can see that about 80% work with low income, more than half were minority, a little less than half were limited English, around 40% were no car households, and about 29% were disabled, and 20% were seniors, which that was a little surprised me that it was that low for seniors. But and then 3% were none of the above, so I don't know who they work with. If you can't work with anybody in those categories. The second, second question was, hopefully you guys can read this, was the observations of the biggest transportation challenges. And these were, this was an open-ended question. So people gave their answers, and then James went back and classified these into different categories. And, the most popular would have been, and you could have multiple answers for these. You could say the biggest observations are, X, Y, and Z, and then so X, Y, and Z might all have scores for this. So you can you will see numbers that add up more to 100%. The number 1 response was insufficient public transit. The next one was cost of transportation. The third one was which with 34% was auto-dependent development, which means development relying on the vehicle. Then it drops down pretty quickly after that to unsafe roadways, job access, access to goods, medical care access, food access, lack of information, language translation services, education parking. I have to relook and see what that means. Handicap access and handicap access. So you can see there's full spectrum right there. And then the second question was basically the same question again, but this time ended, where we gave the actual, we gave them the answers, and then you have to pick from that. And then again, the number 1 was lack of public transportation, followed by distance between origin and destination being the biggest barrier. And then it drops down pretty quickly after that, or pretty substantially, to crossing wide busy streets, and then cost of public transportation, no sidewalks or bike lanes, and lack of private transportation. And then the last question was another open-ended question. It was just suggested improvements to the transportation system. Number 1 was about 30%, which was more or better bus routes. The second one was lower cost transit, which was 22, which is a little strange considering the last one's only had cost of transit being a barrier at 6%. Handicap access improvements at 20%, and longer bus hours 20%. Improved public transit 20%, improved bike facilities 14%, education and awareness, 14%, higher bus frequency 11%, improved pedestrian facilities 8%, and then everything else was 14%. Stacked together was 14%. All of this was detailed much more in depthly in a separate report that we have. This is just this is just a high level breakdown of that, and you can see that certain things came out, like buses, cost of transportation in general, better public transportation. There were some disagreements here. We have before we had in the previous graph, you can see that let's see, where is it? Handicapped access scores pretty low on the biggest transportation challenges. But then when we look at suggestions, it's one of the number 1, it's the top suggestions is better handicapped access improvements. So we have to dig into this more specific, to try to tease apart some of these answers. The second component of this was looking at transportation measures to try to just kind of get a feel for how the system is currently working. And keep in mind that these transportation measures are the ones that we have available. There are other ones that we would have actually probably preferred, like crashes. We don't have good, we have good crash level data at a town level. But when you get down to particular intersections and, things about, the exact cause at the, when it occurred and whether it was raining, all that sort of stuff. We don't have great data for that. So it's hard to make, and we're talking about something like the equity area, making an analysis like that. So we had to settle for some of the stuff that we did have. So we looked at traffic volume. That's something we know fairly well, both through our own model or through our own counts, and then, the DOT model. So the equity area in general has a traffic count level of a traffic volume level of 26.7 million VMT per square mile. VMT is vehicle miles traveled. And it's just, if you have a vehicle and it goes on a 1 mile and it takes one trip, then a 1 mile road, that's 1 VMT. It's just a measure of, how much traffic volume there is. The rest of the region is about 4.2 million VMT per square mile. So the equity area experiences about 6.5 times a higher level of traffic volume than the outside region, but the people living there are 4 times less likely to own a car and are 3 times less likely to have, or less likely to, are 3 times more likely to have fewer vehicles than workers per household. Next up, we looked at, these are 2 separate ones. We have hazardous waste, which can include things that, are not related to the transportation system, but there are plenty of things that are, including just a regular gasoline station. And so hazardous waste and active hazardous waste and generators and unremediated sites. On the left, you can see that, we have way more per square mile in the equity areas. Outside the equity area, looking at green infrastructure, the average tree cover in the equity area is about 27%. Outside the equity area, it's about 71%. And keep in mind, this is including places that are, some are more rural communities, but it also is including areas within Manchester, areas within, all of Bedford, all of Derry. These are areas, downtown, these are places that do have, large, population centers of their own. Air quality. So this one's a little trickier to, because we're talking about health percentiles. So we're looking at the median tracked health, air quality, environmental health percentile. That is to say, you have all the different tracks for both inside the region, outside, or both inside the equity area and outside the equity area. Pick the median for both of those, and then you compare them. And so the equity area, the median track for the equity area has, is in, it's like the 24th percentile there, where the median for the outside the equity area is about the 60th percentile. And in this case, higher is better. That's if you were in the 100th percentile, you'd be in the top 100% best air quality for the nation. Adult asthma is 17% higher in the median equity area tract than it is for the median tract. The rest of the region, and tracts 14, 15, and 20, which are in Central City, Manchester, if memory serves, on the top 5% for nationally for adult asthma prevalence. Looking at impervious land coverage, this is looking at developed impervious land. The equity area, about 60% of the land, 69% of the land is developed or impervious. Now, all of that is obviously for the transportation system, but a lot of it is. And outside the region, it's only 12%. And that the way that comes down to is within the equity area, about 7 times as much of the area is put aside for parking compared to outside the region. And I can show you what that looks like. So here is a map of basically downtown Manchester. Everything in yellow there is off-street surface parking, which is not used for another purpose. So if you had a parking garage and then you had somebody, and then you had a building on top of it, that would not be included here. This is just if you had that surface area is only used for one thing. And the blue is water bodies, and then the red is the outline of the equity area. And within 1 mile of downtown Manchester, about 820 acres, or about over 1 square miles, are used exclusively for off-street parking. Average gross transportation noise. This is just the modeling of what we would expect for background transportation noise from both vehicular, rail, aviation. I'm pretty sure it doesn't include water, it doesn't include, boats or anything like that. But for us, that doesn't matter. We don't have anything like that anyway. But so the average background noise for the equity area is about 3.1 decibels. That's A-weighted decibels. I won't get into what that is, but it's a decibel that's it's been modified to better represent how the human ear hears sound as opposed to just straight up, magnitude. The rest of the area is at a 2.7 dBA. The gross transportation levels in the equity area are 11 times higher than those outside the equity area. And within, if we look at, what are tier 1 roads in New Hampshire, which are interstates and expressways, where you would expect the most road noise. Gross transportation noise levels within a 500 feet of those are only 1.5 times higher in the equity area. But if you go outside of 500 feet of those tier 1 roads, the equity area now experiences sound at 11 transportation noise at 11 times as high as that place, 11 times as high as outside the region. Part of that is because a lot of our noise does come from the airport, but even if including that, there's still just a lot of transportation noise from a lot of our large major arterials that don't have mitigations like setbacks and that sort of thing. Looking at commuting modes, people in the equity area are less likely to drive alone to or for work. As you can see there on the table on the left side there, bottom, top right, top left. They're also more likely to carpool, walk, or bike or take public transit, and they're also less likely to work from home. In general, that's not terribly surprising. These are, if you're living in this area and you work in the industry where you can't work from home, then you're not going to. Within Manchester, we don't have these numbers for track levels, so I can only use Manchester. Within Manchester, Title VI EJ populations are much more less likely to drive alone at work and are much more less likely to carpool or by taking public transportation. So that, if you're, some low-income resident in the equity area is, less likely to drive alone to work and anybody else than the general population in our region, and they're 10 times as likely to take public transportation. So you have somewhat similar, but not that drastic numbers for both minority and LEP, because we have, I can't do it for some of the other classes that we looked at just because the numbers don't exist. And if we compare Manchester to a lot of other cities of similar size, these are small, medium cities outside of the 128-95 corridor. So this is, outside of, immediate greater Boston. We see some fairly different numbers. So Manchester, has, driving alone, the number is, significantly higher in Manchester than it is Portland, whatever. But you can see that there are some variations among the different towns, but Ray Breslin wants in. For some of the other categories, so like public transportation, that you can see, a significantly lower proportion of Manchester's overall population compared to, Worcester or Lowell or Portland are commuting by public transportation. And even less so, or that pattern continues when you look at low-income workers. So just in general, Manchester is not doing as good of a job, serving commuters and low-income commuters as, some of our neighboring peer cities. So now talking about access to transit, Manchester does though have, much better access to transit than, I'm sorry, this equity area has much better access to transit than the rest of the region, because it has transit service. And so you can see here is the frequency of buses within 1/8 of a mile in Manchester and a little bit of Bedford, then Goffstown there. The equity area would be there in the kind of the bright blue. And so you can see we have many more bus stops per square mile in the equity area than outside, just because they do, they exist, they're there. And so then, and the majority of the residents in the equity area live within 1/8 of a mile from a transit group providing 4 to 8 buses per day on average. And so you might not have, great commuting access, but you do have access to getting, if you need to get somewhere, you can get there. It might not be convenient, but you can do it. Within 1/8 of a mile of transit equity area, 67% are minority, within 1/8 of a mile, 67% of the minority population, 66% of the low income population, 68% of the LEP population have service. Where outside the region, it's 16, 18, and 23%, respectively. And coming towards the end here, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Unfortunately, we don't have good pedestrian infrastructure for our region. We have some data for Manchester. We have some from other towns. Kevin in our office is going around, doing collecting more for different towns, and that's great. So we can't really say a lot about it. We assume it's probably better within the equity area, but we can't really say for sure. But when we talk about biking, if you remember the LTS, it's on a scale from 1 to 4, with 4 being the most difficult to bike. And so for the equity area, 31% of the bikeable network is LTS 3 or 4, compared to only 20% for the rest of the region. And this is including off-road networks, so like rail trails, that sort of thing. Only 16% of the bikeable network is LTS 1 in the equity area, and outside the rest of the region, or in the rest of the region, is 29%. So it's higher, the area, it's higher stress within the equity area. This is the last one, road infrastructure. You're looking at the public maintained lane feet per resident or job. That is how many lane feet, how many, a unit of, how much road does it take to serve a certain number of residents or, jobs. And, so it only takes 20 lane feet to serve a resident or job in the equity area, where it takes 64 lane feet outside the region. So it's much more efficient use of road within the equity area than outside it. The equity area, only 17% of the roads, the public lane miles, are federal aid. That is, they are applicable for federal funds, compared to 28% of those outside the federal lane area, outside the outside the equity area. So next steps, will be some of the actual, honestly, some of the hardest parts. We're going to be taking, we're going to have to look at some of the MPO's projects, their actions, maybe not, just planned, and and try to figure out whether there are actual disparate impacts and DHEs within the equity area. And if we determine that there are some, we're going to have to develop strategies to avoid inequities and mitigate them. And this is probably going to be much shorter than the previous sections, but it's much harder because it takes careful consideration and considering, well, what is a cost, what is a benefit, that's all that. So that will be happening in the next year or so. And I believe that's everything. I'm going to stop sharing. Are there any questions?
All right.
There is a
Zach,
question in the chat.
Okay, let's see.
Mark would like to know, is the Fed aid data for lane miles in the equity area still accurate under the new funding categories available to non-state entities in the IIJA?
My guess for that is no, or my question is, it is not the, right, it could be. My guess is this is I'd have to look and see what year it's actually from, but I'm pretty sure it predates any new categories. So if it changes, it could, I'm not familiar with the new funding categories. It could change, I don't know.
It's certainly impressive amount of work, Zach. I was curious, on the maps, it showed a little area that has no data. Could you remind us why there's no data?
I believe you're referring to the airport. Is that what?
I don't know.
Was it? I'm not sure which map you're referring to, but there is no data. So we are. we have 2 census tracts in our region which are bound the airport, and they were designed for exactly for that purpose. And as that, they don't have, there's no population for that, so they can't have what's the poverty percent poverty population for that region. Well, it's not even 0. It's nothing. It's less than. It's not even not 0 because it's whatever 0 divided by 0. So that's the no data.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's probably what it was.
Any more questions?
I like that. I like that kind of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me. I will be giving another presentation at the MPO. Hopefully, for that, I will be a little more lucid in my thoughts. But thank you.
Actually, I thought the presentation was very chipper.
Well, then just you wait and see how I'm going to be dancing for the MPO one.
Exciting.
Okay, other business, road safety audits. Is there some announcement?
Carl.
Hey, guys, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I've got just a couple of slides to go through here, literally 2. There's a bunch of different things happening in transportation funding world. And so I think you need to allow me to share screen.
Did that?
Okay. Let's see if this works. Can you see a screen with a beautiful fall foliage?
We can.
All right. That's the right place then. Bear with me. Just got to hide some things. So road safety audits, it's that time of the year, although now it's out on a rolling basis, but we've put out an alert to everyone. These again are opportunities to work with us in DOT on certain roadway segments, intersections that have a history of incapacitating injuries and fatalities. There's technically a rolling deadline, but we are trying to encourage everybody to do this at the same time of year that we usually do it, which is in the fall. We usually have a deadline of October 1st, but if we can get this together to us by November, we can get it to DOT, and hopefully we'll have some projects in the spring, although that rolls as well, depending on the capacity at DOT. So again, anybody has any questions about road safety audits or eligibility of certain potential projects, just give me a call or an email. The next one, Safe Streets for All. And this is really informational at this point. This is a new program that came out of the IIAJ. It's for over $5 billion over the next 5 years for certain safety projects. We just submitted a $250,000 grant request with our fellow MPOs in Southern New Hampshire. And we will be looking to do basically, there's different categories you can work on here. You can do action plans that allow you to do planning, design, and development activities in support of an action plan, or to actually carry out the construction of projects that are identified in an action plan. So we're at the stage, the step 1 here is we actually need to develop a comprehensive safety action plan. So this will look throughout the region. We'll be looking to work with you, assuming we get this grant, to incorporate potential projects in all of our communities that provide safety for all modes of transportation. And then from that in the future, we'll be able to apply for grants or to develop, as it says here, planning and design through the Safe Streets for All. Next one, and this is just a heads up, CMAQ, Congestion Management and Air Quality Improvement Program. This is a federal program that's been around for quite a while. It's to help meet the requirements of the Clean Air Act through transportation projects. And just a reminder, CMAQ projects are done to reduce congestion, improve air quality for areas that do not meet the national ambient air quality standards for ozone, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter in non-attainment areas, and then also former non-attainment areas that are now in compliance, maintenance areas. And Nate, I think that's what we fall into, right? We're in a maintenance area for ozone.
Yeah, we're not technically a maintenance area. We're in a weird in between that's
we're still eligible.
Known as an orphan area.
Yes, that's right.
We had a maintenance area for carbon monoxide, which is now has now come to a conclusion after 20 years last year. So we are no longer a limited maintenance plan area for carbon monoxide, but we are still an orphan area for ozone. And we were in attainment of ozone, and then there was a lawsuit in California. And so technically we were not in attainment of the ozone standards that existed many years ago. And due to that lawsuit, we're kind of in a weird limbo called an orphan area. So that's a whole other topic for a different day. Suffice it to say, the entire region and all the communities in the region are eligible for CMAQ projects. The reason we're bringing this up now is we've been given a heads up that a CMAQ solicitation will be coming in the not too distant future. So now would be the time for your communities to be thinking about what, if any, CMAQ projects you may wish to apply for in the upcoming round. We expect that the eligibility for CMAQ projects will be very similar to as it has been for the past number of cycles in New Hampshire. So any project that improves traffic flow, so that could be intersection improvement projects, signalization coordination, or adaptive signal control projects, anything that improves traffic flow, helps to mitigate congestion. That's one of the purposes of the program. Alternative fuel projects are eligible. Transit improvement projects are eligible, as well as non-recreational bicycle and pedestrian projects. Non-recreational bicycle and pedestrian projects. So not necessarily the local rail trail improvement project that might be needed, but if there was a large employment destination that was not connected by a sidewalk or a bicycle lane, and connecting that employment destination with a sidewalk or a bicycle lane would allow the opportunity for people not to drive, but to walk or bike, that type of project would be more eligible for CMAQ. So non-recreational bicycle pedestrian projects, any project that improves traffic flow, any alternative fuel project, or transit capital improvement or service improvement are generally eligible for CMAQ. So we say that just to give you the heads up that we do anticipate that a solicitation for that program is coming and will be announced likely in the next number of weeks. So now would be the time to think about what you want to apply for. And as always, our staff here at the commission is available to help your communities scope projects and develop project applications.
Does that include those blinking yellow light, those blinking yellow arrows? Can we have some more of those? Those are excellent.
The permissive left turn arrows. Yeah. So signalization improvements are eligible if they improve traffic flow. So we did see in the last cycle a statewide project to improve a number of signalized intersections around the state. I believe with that very improvement, if I recall correctly.
That's what I remember too. I've you guys can probably see on the screen now, I've just included the new eligibility, and I don't think much of this will be relevant. Perhaps the micro mobility in Manchester, bike sharing and scooter systems. These are added, I believe, in the bill. The diesel replacements, medium, heavy duty, zero emissions vehicles. And I'm pretty sure we won't be doing much with rehabilitation of a lock or dam, marine highway corridor, et cetera, the ones on the right. But these are new eligibility for CMAQ.
Yeah, I would just note, we don't know that. So there are federal eligibilities for the CMAQ program. States have always the ability to be more restrictive in what they wish to fund or the eligible uses. They can't do things that aren't enabled in state law, but states could say, oh, well, there's 10 uses of CMAQ that are enabled federally, but we in this state want to focus on these 4 things. So these are new eligibilities at the federal level. It is yet to be seen whether or not these eligibilities will be implemented at the state level at this point. So states do have the ability to be to restrict the eligibilities to meet the needs of their particular state, and we don't fully know yet, but these are new allowed uses at the federal level. So to we'll have to wait and see what the guidance from New Hampshire DOT is when the solicitation comes out and whether they include some of these new categories as eligible activities at the state level.
There was one other update on SAIDs, and I don't know who was going to do that. Kevin?
I can do it. Can you guys hear me all right?
We sure can.
All right. So we just wanted to raise a little awareness about the New Hampshire statewide asset data exchange system. It's a database owned by the state that can be contributed to by anyone trained to do so, typically either DOT or someone from a regional planning commission. And right now we're collecting pedestrian infrastructure data. So we collect data about the condition and the accessibility of pedestrian infrastructure. So that's sidewalks, crosswalks, crosswalk ramps, actuated signals, like pedestrian buttons, anything like that we're collecting data on right now. So if your municipality has pedestrian infrastructure that you want inventoried, please, you could reach out to me. My email address is klawson, LAWSON, @snhpc.org. And if anyone has any questions, I can take them now or via email.
Kevin, why don't you go ahead and put your email in the chat so anyone virtually can grab that?
Yep.
Yeah, Bruce, this is something I don't think, because you hadn't been to the last TAC meeting where we had a bigger presentation about the SAIDs, but we have done a pilot SAIDs in Auburn. We're now working with Bedford, and Kevin is out in Bedford collecting sidewalk data. And this is no charge to communities. It's absolutely free. So if there's anything that you would like specifically for us to do this assessment with, please definitely contact us, contact Kevin. You haven't met Kevin. He's our newest staff member, for those people who haven't met Kevin. And he's working on our traffic counting program, as well as this and some other programs. So definitely please get in touch.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia.
We'll also be calling, Kevin and I are, I think I'm going to be sending an email out to some of our different municipalities, and we're going to be phoning them, whether it's the end of this week or next week. We'll be doing that sometime soon.
There are 4 chats on there. Did you need to check them? I know the last one's from Kevin, but.
No, those were, I'm so sorry. Tammy takes care of the chat and she let us know about these different questions. So we're good there.
Okay, good. Okay. Any questions for Kevin or any other questions at all? All right, any other business?
Anything for our communities or from Lee from Federal Highway or DOT you'd like to share?
I guess one thing I'll mention, New Hampshire's electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan was recently approved by Federal Highways. So this now allows access to formula funds to support electric vehicle infrastructure deployment throughout New Hampshire. So that was a big step along the way. New Hampshire DOT, led that effort to develop the deployment plan, and it was successful and it's now been approved. So it's a good thing.
I just wanted to say, New Hampshire DOT, we're closing out the federal fiscal year 2022. September is the last month. We received 15 million for redistribution, so we are obligating all our funds. And then in October will be 2023, start the new year.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, declare the meeting over. We're not going to adjourn because there's not a quorum, but thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you all.
You gotta get a quorum.